Hi, I'm Frankie Inetz. I'm the Assistant Principal Examiner for GCSE Sciences. I'm here today to talk to you about the maths assessment skills in the papers that you're going to sit. In biology, 10% of the marks will be maths, in chemistry 20% and in physics 30%. Sometimes it does look like there's more maths on a paper. That's because Ofqual don't always accept that some of the maths counts as maths. It's got to be at least Key Stage 3 standard for a foundation tier paper and Key Stage 4 foundation maths for a higher tier paper. So sometimes what looks like maths, we're actually testing the science. In the paper you might get something, for example, a resistance of a wire equation, and there might be a couple of bulbs in that circuit, and so you have to divide by 2 because there's 2 bulbs. That's science and not maths. So what we're going to look at today is the actual math skills, and I've got some exemplar papers for you. The math skills in the first question is using percentages. The command word is calculate, and you have to apply knowledge and understanding to do this, so the target's AO2. There are 2 marks for this question. This means you need to carry out 2 steps to get all the marks. It's important to read the question carefully so you can decide which numbers you need to use in the calculation. The question tells us the number of cases of scarlet fever in March 2013 and March 2015. It's asking for the percentage increase between these 2 figures. So when you're doing any calculation question, it's important that you show you're working, even if the question doesn't ask you to. This is because you might be able to do the calculation in your head, or you might have used a calculator, but you also could make a mistake. That could be a mistake in the calculation, or sometimes it's just a mistake copying a number down from a calculator onto the paper. If you've shown every step, the examiner can see where you've gone wrong, but they can also see the things that you've done right, and then they can award marks to you for those right things. You may want to pause the video now for a few minutes just to attempt this question. Here's the mark scheme for 3A2. The first step is the subtraction. The second step is the percentage increase calculation. So if you make a mistake in the first step, but use your answer from the first step correctly, in the second step, you can still gain a mark. This is called an error carried forward. Here's an example of a 1-mark answer. The candidate calculated, or possibly just wrote down from the calculator, the incorrect number for the first step. They used this number correctly in the second step and so still got 1 mark, even though the overall answer is wrong. Here's a fully correct answer. The candidate showed they're working to get the correct answer for both marks. They also wrote the percentage sign. They didn't need to do this as the units were given. If ever you need to write the units, the question will ask you to show the units, and this will get you a mark. So the next question is about speed of light. The equation's actually given, so what the candidates have to do is choose the correct numbers from the question and put them into that equation. This means that they're applying their knowledge and using their skills, which means it's an AO2 question. The numbers are given in standard form, and many candidates struggled with this last year. It's a good idea to practice using standard form on calculators so that this type of question would not cause you an issue. There are 3 marks available here. The first 2 marks are for the calculation. However, if you read the question carefully, you would have spotted that you've been asked to state the unit. This means the 3rd mark is for giving the correct unit. This is not a maths mark. This tests your knowledge of the unit of frequency. You have to substitute the correct numbers into the frequency equation and then calculate the answer from that. You must also give the unit. Again, it's important to show you're working. You may want to pause the video now for a few minutes to attempt this question. So here's the mark scheme for 5B. The first mark is for substituting the numbers into the frequency equation. The second for the correct answer. The 3rd mark is for the correct unit. Here's an example of a 3-mark answer. So the 3.0 times 10 to the 8 over 5.8 times 10 to the 7 is the marking point 1. That's where they substituted the correct numbers into the equation. The answer of 5.2 times 10 to the 14 is mark point 2, so that's the evaluation of this answer. And then HZ, or Hertz, is mark point 3. They could have spelt it out fully, but you don't need to. This question tests an understanding of magnification and standard form. In this case, an equation is not given. The calculation in this question is quite simple, and understanding how to calculate magnification is a science point. However, the second part of the question asks for the answer in standard form. This is a maths mark. There are 2 marks here. One mark is for calculating the width of the cell, the other mark is for giving the width in standard form. Again, it's really important to show your working. You may want to pause the video now for a few minutes to attempt this question. Here is the mark scheme for 5A3. Here's an example of a 2-mark answer. If you have a look, the candidate did show their working. First they calculated the width, and then in the second step they converted their answer to standard form. So they've gone from 0.0077 to 7.7 times 10 to the minus 3. It's a really good idea to practice converting numbers to standard form. The next question is 3E from the Chemistry Foundation paper. In this question you'll need an understanding of using significant figures. This is AO2. This question asks for the answer to 2 significant figures. There are 3 marks here. 2 marks are for calculating the number of barrels. The third mark is for converting your answer into 2 significant figures. So it's a really good idea to practice doing this. So you may want to pause the video now to have a go at this question. Just remember, it's really important to show your working. Here's the mark scheme for 3E. Here's an example of a 3-mark answer. The candidate showed their working. First they calculated how many barrels equaled 1% for a mark. Then they calculated the number of barrels of fuel for the second mark. They converted their answer into 2 significant figures for the final mark. This shows it's important to show your working, as if they'd made a calculation error, it would still be possible to gain the final mark if the answer was to 2 significant figures. A question might also ask you to give the answer to a specific number of decimal places, like 2 decimal places, for example. If you do see that, just treat it in exactly the same way as if they'd asked you for a specific number of significant figures. Occasionally you get a question with a table of results in with one of the results missing. If all the results in that table are to a specific or the same number of decimal places, then just make sure that the result you fill in is to the same number of decimal places. So an example of this is in question 5B2 from the Biology Higher Paper 1. The table gives rate to 3 decimal places, and so you should give the rate you've calculated to the same number of decimal places. The 6th question is 5D from the Chemistry Foundation Paper 1. The question tests the understanding of calculations needed when making up solutions. An equation is not given, and in fact there are several ways to answer this question. Where the equation is not given, it's often a good idea to write out the equation you will use if there is one. Then, substitute the numbers into the equation. It's also important to check the units. The volume was given in the question in centimetre cubed, but the units for the answer is in grams per decimetre cubed. This means that you will need to convert centimetre cubed to decimetre cubed. There's 2 marks here. One mark is for that conversion of centimetre cubed to decimetre cubed, and this will involve dividing or multiplying by 1,000 depending on the method you use. The other mark is for calculating the concentration. Again, it's really important to show your working. You might want to stop the video now to have a go at this question. If you're not sure about what equation to use, sometimes you can use the units. So in this case, the grams per decimetre cubed means that something in grams has to be divided by something in decimetre cubed. Here's the mark scheme for 5D, and here's an example of a 2-mark answer. The candidate showed their working. There was no mark for the equation, but it helped the candidate. They calculated the concentration in grams per centimetre cubed, and then in the second step they converted their answer to grams per decimetre cubed by multiplying by 1,000. So hopefully that's answered some of your questions on how to answer these math skills questions. And just before the canteen completely closes up, I'll just go through some of those key points again for you. So first of all, look at the question. What is it asking you to do? What is it asking you to calculate? What are the numbers that you're meant to use? Often there'll be lots of numbers in the question. Try and pick out the ones that are actually key for answering the question. Do you need to know an equation, and do you need to use an equation? What do you need to do with that? Also, what are the units? And does your answer match the units? So make sure that it makes sense. The question might ask you for it in standard form or significant figures or decimal places. Read that on the question carefully and make sure that you do what it asks you to do. And most importantly, show you're working. If you show you're working and you get some of the answer right, you will get some marks. So that was quite a lot of information for you. Don't worry if you don't remember it all. We have an Edexcel website that's got a lot of information. So go to the GCSE Science website and you can find past papers that you can practice these ideas with, and also a guidance to how to do your exams as well. So good luck.